Welcome to the Real News Network and welcome back to our weekly live stream. You can catch our team here live every Thursday, and you can find us reporting on this channel every week, lifting up the voices and stories of real people on the front lines of struggle around the world and bringing together a diverse, wide array of truth tellers, analysts, and fighters for global working class justice. So be sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share your thoughts with us in the live chat right now. All right. Well, Happy New Year and all that. 2025 has wasted no time throwing us back into the burning trash heap of history, and we've got no time to waste here, so let's get rolling. We've got two powerhouse guests joining us today. Returning to the channel, we've got the one and only Francesca Fiorentini, correspondent, comedian, and host of the Bitchuation Room podcast. Francesca is also the former host and head writer of the web series Newsbroke on AJ+, and she hosted the special Red, White, and Who on MSNBC. And joining us for the first time, we've got the one and only Mehdi Hasan, world-renowned broadcaster, former host of the Mehdi Hasan Show on MSNBC, and author of numerous books, including Win Every Argument, which was published in 2023. Mehdi is also a Guardian U.S. columnist, and he is the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of the vital news outlet Zeteo. We're going to start today's stream in my home of Southern California, where cataclysmic wildfires, which continue to explode in frequency and severity due to the man-made climate crisis, have killed at least 25 people, displaced tens of thousands, obliterated entire neighborhoods, and scorched wide swaths of the landscape. The entire region was on high alert this week, with the National Weather Service warning that a new wave of intense winds could cause, quote, explosive fire growth. But there's some relief here in the latest reports. According to the New York Times this morning, quote, dangerous winds were subsiding in the Los Angeles area on Thursday, delivering a boost for firefighting efforts even as frustration grew among displaced residents desperate to return to their neighborhoods after more than a week of devastating wildfires. 9 days after the blazes ignited, no timeline has been announced for lifting many evacuation orders that have affected tens of thousands of Southern California residents. The Palisades fire, the largest in the area, had burned nearly 24,000 acres and was 22% contained as of Thursday morning, according to CAL FIRE. The Eaton fire covered more than 14,000 acres and was 55% contained, end quote. Now, as the fires burn here at home, across the world, Palestinians who have somehow managed to evade the civilization-erasing fires of Israel's genocidal assault for the past year and a half are rejoicing at the bombshell news that the bombing may finally end. In a stunning development, as Jeremy Scahill writes at Dropsite News, quote, an agreement on a deal that will halt, at least temporarily, Israel's 15-month-long genocidal assault on Gaza was announced on Wednesday, to scenes of celebration by Palestinians in Gaza. The agreement is divided into 3 phases, each spanning 42 days, and outlines specifics on the first phase, including prisoner swaps, Israeli troop withdrawals, allowances for displaced Palestinians to return to their homes, while leaving the details of the ensuing 2 phases to be determined through future negotiations. The deal will take effect on January 19th. The terms of the agreement being negotiated are nearly identical to what was on the table last May when outgoing President Joe Biden first announced it, end quote. In his farewell address from the Oval Office last night, President Biden very noticeably tried to take credit for the deal being reached, but reports from inside Israel itself tell a very different story. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported this week that, quote, Israeli sources say that the involvement of the incoming U.S. administration, led by Trump's aggressive Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, revived hostage talks with Hamas. While Netanyahu's propaganda machine claims that Trump has left him no choice, what happens inside his coalition will determine whether the prime minister approves the deal, end quote. So what does this all mean? For Palestinians and Israelis, for the world, and for us working people here in the heart of U.S. empire? What does that tell us about the legacy of the outgoing Biden administration? and about the new international order in the Trump 2.0 era. And with Trump's inauguration just days away, what will next week reveal about what we're actually facing in the coming 4 years with a second Trump administration and a fully MAGA-fied GOP effectively controlling all branches of government? So to dig into all of this, I want to go to our amazing guests, Mehdi Hasan and Francesca Fiorentini. And a quick note to all of you watching live, we're going to be talking with Mehdi and Francesca for the next hour, but we'll be responding to your questions from the live chat in the last half hour of the stream. So if you've got thoughts or questions, please share them in the chat. All right, Francesca, I want to come to you first, sis, because you are back home in LA, right in the middle of the madness, and we've been following your social media updates on the wildfires for the past week. And first of all, I really just want to say that I and the whole Real News team have been thinking of you, your friends, your family, and we are sending you all our love and solidarity in these apocalyptic-ass times. I want to ask if we can start with having you just lay out what the past week and a half have been like for you. What you want most people who don't live in SoCal to know about what you and others there have been seeing, feeling, experiencing, and where do things stand now?
That's a huge question, but thank you so much for having me back. And thank you for, yes, all the kind words. And my heart also is going out to all the people who have lost everything. My sister-in-law lost everything and her family, but so many people are in this position. And I just want everyone to know that we're relying on mutual aid and solidarity from communities. That is what is happening. That is who is around. Right now, people are coming back to their homes, but the air quality is not okay. The AQI doesn't measure things like toxic chemicals burning from electronics or toys or old homes that might have asbestos in it. There's no way to measure that. Nobody's out here telling us how to stay safe, what to do, helping us with air filtration systems, which can often be incredibly expensive. It is all person to person. It is Facebook mom groups to community organizations that were already on the ground. I actually recently just did a piece for Mehdi Zateo, specifically about the people who are coming together in this moment to literally save lives. And one of those people are day laborers, migrant day laborers. Shout out to the Day Laborers Organizing Network and the Pasadena Workers Center. They are organizing day laborers who often have experience in things like landscaping. They know how to handle like a chainsaw to get rid of some of this debris that is blocking people's homes, has fallen on their cars, on and on and on. It is the people. And I hate that. I hate that we only have one another, but also it is a reminder that we are all we have, that if push comes to shove, we are woefully unprepared in this country for this kind of climate chaos. We are woefully unprepared, as we were under COVID, for the kinds of pandemics that will be, again, all too commonplace with our public health infrastructure completely decimated, and it's only going to get worse. So it is really gutting. It is apocalyptic. It is scary, but it is also heartening. And the silver lining is to see some of this solidarity. And I think honestly, people just like getting offline, stop participating in the conspiracy theories. Which again are really, really running rampant right now. There is a lot more to say about what happens next. I'll just say that LA has a massive fight on our hands, and to me, it also plays into the questions that have arisen ever since the 2020 George Floyd uprising about where our money in this city goes. Now, I want to caveat that by saying that no amount of money could have stopped 100-mile winds spreading embers, here and there, and just lighting fire after fire after fire. That is climate change. But on an LA specific level, we have a budget budget that is out of control, skewed towards the cops. We need to change that. And so many grassroots organizations here have been blowing the whistle. And as our elected officials become more representative, you've got shout out to Eunices Hernandez on City Council, Hugo Soto Martinez, also to Nithya Raman, and finally recently elected Isabel Gerardo. All of them are progressives, and 3 of them who were in office at the time voted against that budget that gave more money to the police than any other place. So there is a national conversation we can also talk about that I'd love to talk about, but that is what's happening here locally. There's a fight ahead of us, and it is on every front.
Yeah, and to I think that's beautifully and powerfully put, Francesca, and just to everyone watching, not from Southern California, like I'm sure the images of the Santa Ana winds blowing those embers was quite shocking. They are nothing new to us, but this like speed and this late in, or I guess this early in the year, that is like I remember my own parents being evacuated from their house in 2008 because the Santa Anas had blown embers like over to our side of Brea, and the fires were getting close to our home. Like, this happens all the time, but the speed, the intensity, the ferocity, the fact that these winds are blowing this much in January when normally there's something we expect in the fall, like these, to say nothing of the mega drought that we've been in the Southwest for the past 25 years. I mean, there is so much to talk about here.
I've only lived here for a few years, and I literally don't know when the Santa Ana winds are supposed to happen. Every year it's like, no, it's supposed to be in October. No, they're in August. Like, it's very funny that no one actually knows when they're happening. But yes, what hasn't happened is rain in 9 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess the Santa Anas are just year-round at this point.
Yeah.
So not great, folks. And I also want to highlight what you said, Francesca, about just the impact of the dis and misinformation. And Mehdi, I want to come to you on this question in a second, because it really strikes me as someone who was interviewing folks on the ground in Asheville, North Carolina, in the wake of the hurricane a few months ago. They were saying the exact same thing about how Trump's tweets about FEMA, far-right conspiracy theories about anything, immigrants, like that it was actively hurting relief efforts, and that those relief efforts were largely being driven by mutual aid, by people on the ground. So I want folks to really take that to heart and think about what that means for us as a society that is going to be facing compounding cataclysms like more frequently. Now, Mehdi, I want to bring you in here first to give you a chance to respond to anything that Francesca said there, but also as someone who has worked in the upper echelons of broadcast news, I really want to get your perspective on how the media has responded to these fires, from the manufacture of bullshit pseudo stories driven by whatever Trump or Musk said about the fires, to the media's proven unwillingness to report on these environmental disasters in a continuing context of climate change. And actually, in a searing piece that we published at The Real News earlier this week by columnist Adam Johnson, Adam points out that, quote, a survey of nightly news coverage from the first full day of the LA fire showed that in 16 minutes of coverage, ABC, NBC, and CBS nightly news broadcasts did not mention climate change once. In their Wednesday morning coverage of the LA fires, neither the New York Times Daily Podcast nor the New York Times Morning Newsletter addressed climate change at all. Severe weather events, when they're reported on at all, typically because they're within the U.S., are indexed in the oh dearism genre of reporting, where politics and human decision-making are stripped away entirely, and all one can do is look on helplessly and say, oh dear. There's no villain, victims, but no victimizer. No political actors or politics at all, and above all, no explicit or implicit call to action. Just agency-free human suffering that may sorta, kinda be linked to erratic weather patterns with no sense there's anything the viewer or reader can actually do about it. It's just vaguely sad, and everyone is expected to chip in a few dollars to GoFundMe, gawk at the suffering, and move on to the next extreme weather event right around the corner in a matter of weeks. End quote. Mehdi Hasan, please, your thoughts on the media response to the California wildfires and your advice for viewers about how we need to navigate this chaotic information ecosystem to get the answers we need in times of emergency.
It's a very troubling time when it comes to media misinformation. I am somebody who believes that most of our issues that we have in society right now do go back to the media, right? I'm one of these people who thinks that we need to have long, hard conversations about the information era that we're in. I think people on the left have not done that. I think people on the right are enjoying the fact that people on the left haven't done that. It's became fashionable for a while to say, oh, you can't blame the media for everything. Now, look, a lot of this comes back to how you get your info. You mentioned earlier about kind of the pseudo manufacturing of bullshit news. Adam's spot on in his piece about the O'Dearism and the idea from liberal media, quote unquote, that if you talk about climate change, you're talking about something political, right? The right have so successfully turned science into a partisan issue that you no longer can talk about vaccines or climate science or any other obvious, undeniable scientific issue without sounding like a liberal or a progressive or a leftist. It's actually genius on their part that they've managed to turn science, objective science, into a right-left issue. And so, of course, the liberal media, cowed by the right, doesn't want to touch issues that they think, at a time of storms, at a time of tornadoes, at a time of fires, you can't talk about politics. And therefore, you can't talk about climate change because climate change is coded political. Right. And that is the success story that they've done on the liberal media side. Of course, on the right wing media side, what they have done, and Adam mentions, no villain, no victimizer. That's the liberal view of the world. The right are the masters at understanding the importance of having a villain, right? What they have done so successfully is they've tapped into human beings' basic psyches, basic fears, and understood that for any political crisis, you have to have a bad guy. Democrats have failed to do that. Liberals have consistently failed to do that. The right have rightly understood the need for a villain. Now, the villains they've picked are horrible. Mexicans, Muslims, trans kids, foreigners, immigrants.
DEI caused the fire?
CRT. And they apply that model to any crisis, right? It doesn't matter what it is. So fires come along. It's actually, I tweeted this earlier this week. It's actually kind of admirable from a kind of, if you put your evil genius hat on, you have to admire the ability for the right to turn in a matter of days, some might say hours, an issue of objective climate change, natural disaster, what do we do about this policy-wise, into, no, it's about the water hydrants and the pressure in the water hydrants, and it's about the number of helicopters, and why don't we have drones in the skies, and why was Karen Bass in Ghana, and we can go down the list of what they've managed to do in terms of empty reservoirs and DEI firefighters and all of the rest.
Why didn't they use their weather machines?
Why didn't they use their measurements to control it for good, not evil? And that is actually admirable. I'm sorry. It's amazing because a lot of people, I think, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, would have said, wait till climate change starts hitting the US. Wait till people start dying. Then everyone will be forced to take it seriously. Actually, it turns out, no. Even if you're losing Americans in front of your eyes, they can make you look elsewhere. Right? That is the power of propaganda. And, in the old days, it would have been Rupert Murdoch on Fox. Today, it is Elon Musk and social media and Mark Zuckerberg and co. And Musk has, of course, been driving a lot of this. There was that hilarious moment where he asked firefighters about water pressure. They were like, no, we were good on water. But that is the power of propaganda and misinformation. And I was talking to a colleague earlier about this. We've had the right so successfully hijack the debate about media information, say it's censorship. And Mark Zuckerberg last week came out and said, censorship, we're going to get rid of our fact checking. And actually, no, I'm sorry. The debate has to be about content moderation. It has to be about responsible journalism. When people are dying, we can have inane, abstract debates about free speech, but people are dying in a pandemic. Yeah, I do want Facebook to take down posts saying put ivermectin in your body or inject yourself with disinfectant. Yeah, I do want people to be able to say, you know what, in the middle of a hurricane in North Carolina, don't stay in your home because if you leave, the government are going to seize your property. You might die. Right, even the local Republican congressman said that time. So I do think, when people's lives are on the lines, it's very easy to have abstract First Amendment discussions. But in public emergencies, we can't just have unlimited misinformation. And people say, oh, that's authoritarian. No, it's how it's always been.
Yes.
Until very recently, when these libertarian freaks pretend that there should be no restrictions on their lies and gaslighting. So look, we need to have hard conversations about all this stuff. The moment Elon Musk bought Twitter in 2022, that in itself told us the Democrats and the liberal side of the spectrum were not ready for this fight. The fact that they just rolled over and can you imagine if George Soros next month tried to buy Fox? You think the Trump administration, Republicans in Congress would be like, yeah, free market, do what you want to do. No, they would do everything they could to stop it because they understand the power of those platforms. Liberals and leftists have not understood the power of those platforms.
Right, or the efforts to rein them in move so glacially slowly, although they begin, and that inevitably, if you don't actually break up big tech, it will just get eaten by a bigger and bigger and bigger fish. And I want to just say that just on social media, misinformation and disinformation, it's truly leading to online vigilantism that is terrifying, so that everyone thinks that they are a particular sleuth to find out who started the fires. Likely a downed power line, you dumb idiots. Everything else that started wildfires here in this state of California, it's a downed power line, okay? But so just to say that it is really getting into a terrifying level of vigilantism, and people are using apps to do exactly this. So it's taking misinformation and applying it in real world and making citizens arrests and things like this.
But also, just to go back to your original question about what can people do who are not crazy freaks, I think people watching this need to understand that, A, don't play the game, don't participate in the kind of crap that Francesca highlighted and you've highlighted. But also, I mean, the death of expertise and respect for expertise. I mean, look, I'm on the fence on this one. You know, elites have lied to us for a long time. A lot of foreign policy experts got us into Iraq and, you know, defended Gaza. But I do worry since the pandemic, when you saw, you know, Dr. Fauci became the villain of the right, not Donald Trump, the man who said put disinfectant in your body, not Republican politicians who refused to kind of mask or do basic mitigation measures, but Fauci became the villain of the right-wing movement. Scientists started going around with bodyguards. People like my friend Peter Hotez in Texas had people turning up at his home to try and film him. I think that is a reminder of, you know, there's a great meme doing the rounds, like, last week I was a COVID expert. This week I'm an expert on water pressure in California. Like, people log in and overnight everyone on Twitter becomes an expert on whatever the du jour story is. I think that's a real problem. Social media is really empowered. And Bill Burr did a great line on Jimmy Kimmel the other night saying, you know, some fuckhead in his underwear in his mother's basement is now suddenly the world's expert on California water pressure systems. Like, get a grip on everyone. You know, this especially in the US, where academia is seen as some kind of shadowy force. People in ivory towers are not to be trusted. It is really weird that we don't go, oh, there's a crisis about wildfires. Let's ask the wildfire experts what we should do. There's a crisis about COVID. Let's ask vaccination experts and, you know, disease experts and infectious disease experts what we should do. No, in this country, it's let's ask a pundit on cable news what we should do.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to say. I do just want to talk about really quickly, just add to Mehdi's point about a villain and creating villains. And obviously we know that the villain in the LA fire story is the fossil fuel industry, and that is so clear, but there's a lot of sub-villains within that. And right now you've got Republicans who are talking about tying aid relief for California to a budget that would enshrine the Donald Trump tax cuts for billionaires into law. So quite literally the 1% that gave us these wildfires, that giving us these once in a century flood, they're going to enshrine that 1% even more. So the enemy is the billionaire class, and it is no clearer than when you look at climate chaos and what the billionaire class continues to people bring on all of us. Go ahead.
People just don't see it, right? This is the problem right now. It's obvious it's the billionaire class. It's obvious it's the fossil fuel industry. But I'm talking about even apolitical people, not like Fox junkies, but such as the power of the social media discussion and the kind of background noise, and such as the discipline of the right-wing media machine and right-wing pundits and right-wing politicians to say the message in unison in a way that Democrats or liberals or leftists don't, is that today, for example, if you ask people, oh, California, was it really bad? Should there be conditions? I think the average person would say, yeah. But what about Texas? But what about Texas?
Yep.
I don't hear the same, you know, we don't talk about Texas in the same way. Max mentioned at the start, 25 people are dead. That's 25 too many. I'm sure that death toll is going to go up. In Texas, 250 people is the government's death toll. 700 is the unofficial death toll from the snowstorms a couple of years back when Ted Cruz fled to Cancun, right? When the Texas power grid shut down. There were no consequences from that. No one talks about tying aid or conditions for Texas. There were no political, people like Karen Bass's career is over. Greg Abbott got reelected after that. Ted Cruz got reelected after that. Why? Because, again, liberals and the left are not very good at creating villains in the same way that the right does.
Because they often receive money from the exact same class that the right does. I mean, we have villains set out before us. Look, the fact is the matter is that 10 years ago, we didn't have names like Elon Musk or Mark Andreessen or Sam Altman or whomever else, other billionaires who were in the rooms with Donald Trump. We didn't have those names. The income disparity was already concentrating, but we didn't have the names. Yeah. Now we've got literal names, these emblems of late stage capitalism.
They're literally going to be sitting on stage next week in the inauguration.
Yes. Yes, and we still can't name them. And I just want to say, Democrats are not off the cuff here. I just want to shout out the Lever had an incredible report about how the California Insurance Commissioner, who oversees fire insurance in this state, has received contributions from the insurance industry and is currently, in 2023, passed a reform that would allow the buck to be passed to consumers versus the insurance agency, because insurers are leaving California. We all know this. They're leaving Florida. They're leaving everywhere. And instead...
They're not leaving Florida. Florida's a perfect place in America. What are you talking about?
Well, actually, ironically, Florida has more checks and balances looking at the insurance industry there than in California. Wow. So all to say, Ricardo Lara is his name. He's going to be throughout LA. If you see him, and if he's giving you good information, great. All right. But also, he has taken money from the insurance industry to specifically pass reforms that would make consumers' premiums go up and let them off easy. They would have to do very, very little. They have to try to cover people for 2 years, 5% more coverage. Oh, but if it gets too expensive, they're going to leave. Yeah. Meanwhile, they're literally hiring private firefighting forces that are protecting the buildings that they insure, to say nothing of the Republicans like Rick Caruso, who also hired private firefighters to protect his property and wants to be mayor. So again, it always gets worse, and we're going to see that come Monday, how all of this is going to get worse.
And, just to kind of add one more thing there on just how absurd this entire situation is and how villainous it is. And then I want us to kind of pivot and talk about Gaza here in the next half hour. But my colleague Dave Zirin was talking to us about this earlier this week. It's like the Monday night football game that the Rams were playing was supposed to take place in Los Angeles. It got moved to Arizona. Everyone on the media, in the sports media, was talking about, oh, what a great effort it was to move this game to the State Farm Stadium in Arizona, when State Farm are the pieces of shit who just revoked a bunch of people's home insurance a month ago before these fires. It is absolute madness. And one more point I wanted to make, because Mehdi, you mentioned the need for expertise and verifiable information and authoritative information. I want to also complement that with information and firsthand accounts and stories and human faces of the working people who are being affected by this. And that is what we do here at The Real News. I remember when the Baltimore Bridge collapsed last year, and all these same pieces of shit were on right-wing media saying, oh, it was DEI that caused the mismanagement here, that collapsed the bridge. Yep. I was there talking to the immigrant workers who were co-workers of the men who died on that bridge. I was talking to longshore workers about how the shipping industry has made these container ships bigger, filled with more dangerous materials. 2 to 3% of them are only abiding by U.S. Port regulations. The others are flags of convenience ships. We're not talking about that. Instead, people are running around talking about bullshit like DEI. The same way that I was talking to folks in Asheville who were dealing with the effects of that hurricane, the same way I talked to folks who were living near Eagle Pass in Texas, who had a bunch of right-wing idiots show up in their town and cause more destruction than the undocumented immigrants who were supposedly crossing the border. But then all these right-wing nutjobs got there and there was no one there. I want East Palestine, Ohio, where the train derailed. Yes. I've been there multiple times. I've interviewed countless people from that community. Immediately, once that train derailed and those people's lives were turned upside down, and they are still sick. They are still suffering. I talk to them every week. It was a media circus over who's more to blame for this, Trump or Biden. Who's going to get there first, Trump or Biden? Everyone just cares about that, and then they stop caring about the people who are right at the center of it, and that includes you and me and any one of us who are in line to suffer this kind of catastrophe in the future. And sadly, there are going to be more of them, whether they're caused by industrial accidents, climate change, what have you.
Yeah.
So what
I
you're-
want to. Oh, please.
What you're
Mehdi,
saying
go.
is we didn't do enough coverage of James Woods' house almost burning down in LA.
Yeah,
That's
poor
what you're
James-
saying. The real story.
Yes. I'm saying my heart bleeds certainly for James Woods. But I will say on that note that I am deeply disappointed in so many people on the so-called progressive left, who were talking about my home, Southern California, as if these fires only burned James Woods' house and that they
Sure.
were something to be celebrated. When I'm seeing people
Yes.
who are being displaced, who live in homes that they couldn't afford to buy now, but maybe they've been there for a generation and the property values have gone up. So they're not all these rich people that you're pretending like are non-sympathetic
also
characters.
Conversation perhaps for another day, but having worked at MSNBC and seen CNN, how it goes, and I say this as someone who moved to the US from another country, there's also an East Coast bias with our media, right? The West Coast is another country. For people in New York and DC, LA is not the same value, important status. I think I saw something a week ago in the midst of all the LA fires, houses destroyed, 27,000 acres. I think apartment block was on fire in New York, and it was like live footage suddenly from this one building in New York on fire. And that's always going to be the case. One building in New York will always get more coverage than the entire city outside of the East Coast. And there is that long-standing problem, bipartisan problem, forget right or left, there is an East Coast bias amongst our media. That's a fact.
Yeah, for sure. And also just really quickly, I mean, I was tuning into local news for the first time in a real, ever, because you're watching local news, and you're like, oh, okay, obviously I'm like using my husband's family's login to get to the login. That's how I watch
the news was made for. Fire trucks, things on fire.
But exactly. But again, a lot of people don't have cable or don't have their TV set up or whatever, only doing streaming. And so then for breaking news, and this is why the ownership of Twitter is incredibly important, they are going to Twitter. And if you're not doing any fact checking on social media, then we are so
Twitter
fucked.
used to be a great place in a crisis. Now it's the worst place in a crisis.
Yes.
Speaking of, terrible places, I want to turn our eyes to the other side of the world where we have been watching, one of the greatest crimes of humanity unfold over the past year and a half on platforms like Twitter. I want to turn to Gaza and Israel, where as of right now, there is both hope and trepidation about whether or not this truce deal reached this week will actually be accepted and implemented by Israel. The Associated Press reported just this morning, quote, a last-minute crisis with Hamas holding up Israeli approval of a long-awaited agreement to pause the fighting in the Gaza Strip and release dozens of hostages, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Thursday. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes killed dozens of people across the war-ravaged territory. The Israeli cabinet was expected to vote on the deal Thursday, but Netanyahu's office said they won't meet until Hamas backs down, accusing it of reneging on parts of the agreement in an attempt to gain further concessions without elaborating on that. A senior Hamas official said the group is committed to the agreement announced by the mediators, end quote. Mehdi, I want to come back to you here, and then Francesca, please hop in after. We still don't know if this ceasefire deal will take effect as planned this Sunday. The next 72 hours are going to be very critical and very intense. But if the deal does take effect, what will this mean and what will it not mean for Gaza, for Palestinians, and for Israel and Israeli society? And that is the single most important question right now. So only once we've all addressed that, then let's talk about what these developments tell us about the legacy of Biden's administration and what the hell, we can expect in geopolitics in the Trump 2.0 era.
I mean, they're interlinked in the sense that I'm thoroughly cynical about everything that happens in the Middle East, and I'm very cynical about the Israeli government because they are a group of very cynical people. And all American negotiators, whether Democrats or Republicans, don't have the best interests of the people at Gaza at hand. Let's be honest about that. Look, if this is real in any shape or form, even in a temporary form, that's a good thing. Because even if you get an hour where the bombs stop falling, that is some kind of relief for one of the most oppressed peoples on earth, the Palestinians of Gaza, who spent the last 16 months being genocided, right? Having their capacity to continue living, existing destroyed in front of our eyes, live streamed to us, as the Irish lawyer for the South African government said exactly a year ago at the ICJ. This is the first genocide where people are live streaming their own genocide, begging for help from the rest of the world. And a year later, here we are with no change. So if we've even got an hour of a pause, I'll take it, and Palestinians in Gaza will take it. Now, that doesn't mean, though, we have to start celebrating and, cheering and suggesting that there is peace in the Middle East, peace in our time. That's bullshit. And I'm very skeptical about this deal, not just because Netanyahu today said they're not going to vote on it, not just because Ben Gvir, his far-right terrorist, convicted terrorist national security minister, has threatened to resign if the deal goes through, and that means the Netanyahu government would fall, and Netanyahu is all about self-preservation. But separate to that, just look at the deal itself. A, it's the exact same deal that was on the table in May of last year that the Israelis rejected, but the Americans lied and said Hamas rejected. B, it involves 3 phases, right? 42 days for the first phase, 42 days for the second phase. It's really the second and third phases where the actual long-term impact of this kicks in terms of withdrawal of Israeli forces, in terms of any kind of humanitarian reconstruction. Those 2 phases, a lot of people are saying we will never get to, right? Netanyahu is only interested in phase 1. If we even get to phase 1, where you do a limited release of prisoners, and then he goes back to bombing. Netanyahu has made it very clear that he's not going to stop the war. He doesn't want to stop the war, and that's why he's never been interested in a ceasefire. He's only interested in pauses. So, some people are spent the last 24 hours attacking me on social media because I was one of the people who said Trump will be worse on Gaza than Biden. So there's a lot of gotcha moments going on right now. So, well, look, Trump was better. He did it in 24 hours, what Biden couldn't do in a year. I would say let's wait and see, right? I'm old enough to know that Donald Trump is not what you think, is not what you see. And people who have celebrated Donald Trump early tend to find egg on their faces. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope that in a year's time or 6 months' time, people will say, Mehdi, you were wrong. Donald Trump was much better for the people of Gaza than Joe Biden. But the man is not even president yet. Please stop the premature celebrations. Let's see if this ceasefire happens on the Sunday. Let's see if it holds. Let's see if it actually delivers peace. Let's see if we get any kind of reconstruction, because stopping the bombs is only one part of it. Gazans cannot continue to exist in a place that is uninhabitable, which experts say will take, 80 years to rebuild. 42 million tons of rubble. So I want to see what happens first. Already today, we've seen Donald Trump's incoming national security advisor, Waltz, Michael Waltz, I think his name is, saying that we support Israel's right to go back into Gaza whenever they like. We've seen Marco Rubio, who's going to be the Secretary of State, saying he's going to lift all sanctions on the settlers that Joe Biden brought in, the limited sanctions on the limited far-right settlers. So this is far from done. The people who think it's all done now are being very naive and have learned nothing from the first 4 years of Trump. But look, having said all that, I know you want to get into it in a bit. Clearly Trump's done more than Biden in the last week in terms of applying pressure. That's undeniable. And it's embarrassing for Joe Biden and the Democrats that that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Francesca, please hop in.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think, everyone is rushing to do the thing we were just talking about in LA, right? Is like rushing to have a take on what's happening while it's still unfolding and we don't know what's going to happen,
exactly.
Right? And so I think everyone, especially on the MAGA Trump side, is trying to kind of sell this as a, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan hostage kind of moment before we even know if the deal is going to be accepted.
It's interesting
and
you mentioned the hostage situation because, of course, in 1968, you had Nixon, Vietnam, and Kissinger. We discover later that Kissinger was treacherous and was passing messages to the Vietnamese saying, we'll do a better deal, don't stop the war now. And many more Americans and Vietnamese, of course, and Cambodians and Laotians died because of that. We know that in 1980 now, and there's a great new book from Craig Unger on this, that Jimmy Carter was very close to getting the hostages out of Iran, but Ronald Reagan said to the Iranians, don't do it, I'll give you a better deal and I'll get you weapons. And this may be the third time that happened. We know that Netanyahu and Trump met at Mar-a-Lago last year. We don't know what was discussed, but I wouldn't be surprised if Trump said, make sure you hold off till I'm in office so I get the credit. We know Trump doesn't give a shit about Palestinian life. It's all about his ego and showing that he is a deal maker. He's a successful president. He wanted this done by January the 20th. By the way, it's not going to be done by January the 20th. Can I just point that out? Everyone, I love the way we grade Donald Trump on a curve. Even the left grades Donald Trump on a curve. He literally said he wanted all the hostages released by January. Hostages won't be released by January the 20th. The deal only begins on the 19th. So this is the man who also said he he would end the Ukraine war in 24 hours, right? Good luck with that. Apparently it's going to be over on Monday night. So this is the kind of bullshit that unfortunately leftists too have allowed Trump to be graded on a curve about. And like I said, I hope to be proved wrong. But to say that I'm wrong right now, or that those of us who warned against Trump on the issue of Gaza are wrong because there's this ceasefire deal that hasn't been even implemented or voted on by the Israelis yet, calm the F down.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. But I will say I was surprised. Like when I heard it came through, I was like, oh, completely shocked. And it's amazing that Netanyahu hasn't even agreed to it, that it hasn't even gone forward. But the narrative of Trump got a ceasefire is already out there, right? And again,
right? What we talked about earlier, they're masters
exactly. Exactly. And I mean, it's the kind of like the Bill Barr, there was no collusion headline. Everyone was like, oh, okay, there was no collusion. Yep. You know, and that made it. That's the headline. And so Trump got the ceasefire. But again, I was reacting to it sort of in real time on my show. And I was like, damn, it really does. And here's the thing. We need to be very careful about not, as, you know, Noura Erakat, lawyer, a Palestinian lawyer, awesome academic said, don't give Trump any flowers on this, right? It is really a revelation of Joe Biden and the inability to actually get a ceasefire after the professing of working round the clock. I mean, I think maybe the difference is between, you know, the Nixon and the Carter examples, Mehdi, is that I don't know if Joe Biden really was working on a ceasefire around the clock. I mean, I don't think he was actually invested.
He certainly didn't apply pressure. I mean, this is the deal. To be fair to Biden, this is the deal that they put on the table. That the Americans agreed.
Yes.
He never applied the pressure. I wrote my first column for The Guardian last February, and it was a column about how Ronald Reagan called Menachem Begin in 1982 when the Israelis were besieging Beirut. He saw a child on TV with no arms. He rang Begin and said, this is a Holocaust. And Begin said, how dare you use the word Holocaust? But no one called Reagan an anti-Semite. In those days, you could say that. He said, this is a Holocaust. You need to stop this now. In 20 minutes, the Israelis stopped bombing Beirut. I said at the time, in February of 2024, Biden can make a phone call and end this genocide. You know, the very serious people, the very savvy, smart people, oh, no, it's not that simple. You can't do that. Actually, you can, right? Steve Witkoff went to Israel and said to Netanyahu, it's got to be done in time. I don't care if you're on a holiday. But look, how much of it was pressure? How much of it was mutually beneficial behavior by Netanyahu and Trump? We don't know yet. Right? Yeah. The thing about Trump is half the things come out in like memoirs and books. We have reporters sitting on stories that they write about in, you know, best-selling books like a year later. You're like, why didn't you tell us that at the time? Like how many New York Times and Washington Post and Politico reporters have done that? So I would like to hear what happened at Mar-a-Lago last year. I would like to hear what was actually said between Witkoff and Netanyahu. How much of it was pressure and Netanyahu's arm being twisted? How much of it was Netanyahu and Witkoff and Trump saying, this is good, we'll make it look like you pressured me into this because it's mutually beneficial for it to happen this way?
Sure. And obviously, you know, who knows the back deals that were promised around the West Bank and annexation and the Miriam Adelson money and all that.
The Israeli press called it a gift bag, Francesca. They've said that Trump gave
lifting sanctions on Pegasus, which could come in very handy for an authoritarian regime. I mean, I think like, again, like a lot of these details are going to come out in the wash. But I think like one distinction that, came up in the great interview that Jeremy Scahill did on Drop Site News yesterday with Palestinians reacting to the news was a sort of distinction that when it comes to Biden, he's very much ideological in this regard. Like he's expressed himself as a full-fledged Zionist who wants his legacy or wanted his legacy to kind of be pegged to standing with Israel, whereas Trump's is more transactional. And like, I mean, this guy's got a whole lot of things he wants to do right here. He's seen how much Gaza has like tanked Biden's administration, hampered that administration. He doesn't want to have to deal with that. I do think that's a useful distinction. But I wanted to ask what you guys think.
Can I just jump in very briefly and push back a little bit? I hear that a lot. That Trump is transactional. The implication of that is that there is some consistent strategy to what Trump says or does. I refuse to accept that. Trump is only consistently inconsistent. So, okay, he's transactional in the sense that he's a businessman. He likes to make money for him and his kids, right? He likes to do deals and wrote books about it and sees himself as a deal maker. I get that. But in actual reality, the man is a narcissist. He's a dumbass. He's an ignoramus. He's a vain, thin-skinned little man. And the idea that people can't manipulate him is absurd. He's the most easily manipulated politician of our lifetime. So when people say, oh, well, he's transactional, he's not an ideological Zionist, even if I accept all that, which I'm not sure I do, he's surrounded by people who are. Like you're telling me that Marco Rubio and as I say, Michael Waltz And what about Mike Huckabee?
Huckabee?
The man who says there's no such thing as Palestinians, there's no such thing as the West Bank. I just want to know, what's Mike Huckabee thinking for the last 48 hours? He's okay with this? Clearly, stuff has been going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. There is long-term ramifications that we don't know about. And I think we have to really be skeptical of this idea that somehow Donald Trump's going to just do deals with the Saudis and the Turks and the Qataris, and that's why he's different to Biden, who's this lifelong Zionist. No, I mean, first of all, he's not even freaking president yet. We've got 4 years of shit coming down the line. Talk to me at the end of 4 years. If at the end of 4 years, Palestinians are free, if at the end of 4 years, Iran hasn't been bombed, if at the end of 4 years there isn't another genocide in Yemen, then fine, I'll be the first to come on here and say I was 100% wrong about Trump. But come on, have we learned nothing from the first Trump term?
I mean, I think transactional can be taken in two different ways. Transactional it sounds like diplomacy, but I think when people say it, when people say it, it's more like anything for flattery. And to me, I think he is able to read the room. I think, and there's a line from one of his rallies over the last year that really stuck with me, where he goes, well, and Biden, he's terrible on Israel. He hates Israel, hates the Jews. He was basically trying to he does the browbeating of Jewish voters, So he was saying he hates Jews, but I guess he hates Palestinians a little bit more. And there was a smile, and I was like, because even he knew what he was saying was bullshit, and that actually Biden is helping genocide the Palestinian people. And there was that smirk as he understood that all of the Democratic voters, that now a YouGov poll proves that so many people voted on Gaza.
I mean, in that sense, he's an evil genius. The man is both an ignoramus and an evil genius. I mean, he went to Dearborn, Michigan, which Biden didn't dare to go to, Kamala Harris didn't dare to go to. He went to Dearborn, Michigan and said, I am a peacemaker. I will bring peace to the Middle East. Liz Cheney will get Muslims killed. Don't listen to Liz and Kamala. I'm the peacemaker, right? And people lapped it up, which is nonsense. Go back and look at Trump's first term. Again, I know Americans have the memory of a goldfish. The guy increased bombing in Iraq, bombed Syria, increased drone strikes in Pakistan and Somalia, helped MBS genocide Yemen, etc. I can go through the whole record. The idea that Donald Trump was some kind of anti-war, anti-interventionist candidate is a complete myth. But again, as you pointed out with the Bill Barr report, he's transactional. He didn't collude with Russia. He's anti-war. He's a master of getting these one-line narratives about himself out there, which somehow people stick to. He is Teflon Don.
Well, and it's more than him. I mean, I think, Mehdi, that it is this desire for a demagogue to just take the reins. And I think everyone has that. I'd loathe to think that I would have that but there is, even liberals or liberal media, there's hey, maybe he's such an idiot, he's smart. They're
also strongman. I mean, I spoke to Noga Tarnopolsky yesterday in our live town hall for Zateo, the Israeli journalist, and she said, look, even Israeli leftist politicians are buying into this idea that he was this strongman who came in and just beat up Netanyahu and made him do it. And she didn't buy that narrative either, but even leftists see that. And by the way, one thing I would say about the American left is what I've seen over the last few days and during the election campaign is in the desperate desire to kick Joe Biden, which I totally get and understand. I've got a piece coming out in about 10 minutes on Joe Biden's awful legacy on Gaza. The problem is where I split with some of my fellow leftists in America is this idea that in order to do Biden down, you have to promote Trump. Right, this idea that Trump is bad. I can be very critical of everything Biden did without, drinking Kool-Aid about Donald Trump. And that is what I'm seeing now in the last few days. The reason why we're seeing in the narrative of Trump, the peacemaker, Trump did this, it's not just the right pushing it. There's a lot of people on the left trying to attack Biden by saying, look, Trump did what you couldn't do. And I get all that, but that only helps the Trump narrative. Like I said, we don't know the backstory to this ceasefire deal yet. I don't know if it's real. I don't know if Trump went and, twisted Benjamin Netanyahu's arm and made him do something he didn't want to do. We don't know what was offered in return. We don't know what the long-term consequences are for Gaza and the West Bank. But they're, again, graded on a curve. It's not just the right and liberal media that grade Trump on a curve. I think progressives do it too, because we're understandably so frustrated with the Democrats that we give Republicans a pass on things we wouldn't give Democrats a pass on.
I agree with that. I think we're trying to cajole.
Anti the entire establishment.
I think there's a desperation to cajole the liberal, the Democratic leadership to be see what a little bit of backbone might get you. I think, but you're right, there's a slippery slope there, and absolutely it can play into the same Trump did a thing narrative that we know is bullshit.
Right. And I want to kind of make one point and then throw one more question before we got to let Mehdi go, because I know you only got a couple more minutes, man. But like I would point people to a very instructive interview that I did with Sarah Nelson, the president of the Flight Attendants Union, who famously became a household name 6 years ago in the midst of the longest government shutdown led by Trump and the GOP, ostensibly to secure billions of dollars for his stupid southern border wall. And the government was shut down for 35 days. 400,000 federal workers went to work during that entire time without pay. Yeah. It was this high stakes game of political brinkmanship, as every government shutdown inevitably is. But I had Sarah on and asked her what we could learn from that moment from that struggle going into the next 4 years. And I think she really rightly pointed out something that I want to introduce to the conversation that we're having right now, which is like, we are going to get trapped in this kind of same bipartisan bullshit cycle if those are the only two terms that we have to define our political values, our struggle, the things that we're actually fighting for. Whereas Sarah rightly pointed out that even though Trump is coming and we are going to have to be on the defensive, we're going to have to come to the aid of our immigrant neighbors, our trans and LGBTQ folks neighbors. Everybody who is under attack needs to be protected. But if we are just responding to the Trumpian news cycle, we are not fighting for the working class with principle, consistency, and with strategy. And Sarah, I would, again, point people to that interview. I'm not going to go into it all now, but really listen to what she's saying and take to heart what that's going to mean going into these next 4 years, and how we have to define our terms as a class, a global working class, and what we need and who's getting in the way of it, Democrat, Republican, whatever, and keep fighting consistently for what we need. And in that vein, looking ahead at the next 4 years, with the last few minutes we've got, Mehdi, I wanted to ask you both if we could look ahead to next week's inauguration, sticking with this theme of geopolitics and international relations in the Trump 2.0 era, right? And as I said before, Fran, you've been talking about this quite a lot, and I really appreciate it, and Mehdi, you as well. So let's talk about how, first, the Trump effect has impacted countries around the world, from Argentina to El Salvador, Italy, India, Brazil, over the past 8 years since Trump was first elected. And let's help our viewers understand this global rightward shift that is really happening here. Like, what does it mean, for instance, that Trump has invited far-right leaders to attend his inauguration, like President Nayib Bukele from El Salvador, Argentinian President Javier Milei, Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and that some, like Milei, are actually going to be there on Monday. Mehdi, please hop in.
I'm glad you mentioned this. I've been tearing my hair out for almost a decade now, trying to point out that this isn't just about Donald Trump in the United States. This is a global phenomenon. You can't understand it in isolation, but you do need to understand that Donald Trump, by virtue of the U.S. being the U.S., is the symbol of it, is the leader of it, is the inspiration for it, is the guiding star for it, sets the benchmark for it. So whether you're Narendra Modi in India, or Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, or Erdogan in Turkey, or Orban in Hungary, or Putin in Russia, or Le Pen in France, or Farage in the UK, go down the list, Milei in Argentina, Bolsonaro in Brazil, they look to the United States for inspiration. They see what Trump gets away with. And they try and do the same. And it's remarkable. I used to do a show for Al Jazeera English called Up Front, a weekly show where I interviewed politicians around the world. One thing I noticed in 2017, 2018, 2019 was the politicians I was interviewing from Africa and Asia all started sounding like Trump. They were all saying the same. They were literally echoing. And why not? Why wouldn't they? They look at America, they go, worked in the US. Why can't we do it here?
Didn't Duterte say fake news? Wasn't that his?
All of those lines, fake news, and all of that stuff about enemy of the people, and all the just downright lying about what's in front of your eyes. All of that I started noticing in interviews I was doing with politicians around the world. That is the Trump effect globally. And that's why it was so important to try and stop Trump from coming back to office, not just for the United States, but because of the symbol and the message it sends around the world, because of the power of this networking. When people talk about domestic extremism, it's not domestic, it's transnational, right? White supremacy, supremacy of all forms, racism, fascism is transnational. It is very global. We are seeing liberal democracy on the decline, in the retreat, and migrants and Muslims Muslims, especially demonized across the Western world. So it is really important to pay attention to all these connections and see who Donald Trump is sponsoring and propping up, and understanding that this is a common struggle wherever you are in the world. And to go back to your point about Sarah Nelson, I would tie that into here to make a final point, which is we have to stick with our principles, right? That is what's key. What worries me now is in an age of social media, we're very cultish, we're very partisan, and that's not just the right. The right are they're way out there, but the left, liberals, progressive, centrists are not immune to the online disease of cultism and partisanship, right? This idea of politics as a football game. I support my team, not your team, and I'll turn a blind eye to my team's excesses as long as I'm attacking your team. That's a problem, right? Politics is not about personalities, it's about issues, it's about principles. I think that is the only way we get through this era. I went on Blue Sky yesterday and I saw a long list of prominent liberals saying, "Thank you, Mr. President, for getting this ceasefire deal." What? Like, that's as bad as the MAGA people saying Donald Trump is peace of our times, right? We got to get away from this idea of like holding up politicians or political parties and saying, I support them. No. You support principles. And if they're in line with your principles, then you get behind them. And I think that is what we've forgotten. And social media is making much, much worse by kind of treating everything as a kind of putting you in your echo chamber, putting you in your tribal bubble. And if we're going to survive the Trump era, if we're going to survive fascism, we have to stick to principles, not people and politicians.
And Fran, real quick before you hop in, I just wanted to...
Is that what I'm hearing? I think that's what I'm hearing, Mehdi.
Exactly. He's the Mandela of our...
Yeah. And I just wanted to hop in because, Mehdi, I know you've got to go, but I wanted to really, really encourage everyone watching, if you are not already, please go support Zeteo. Mehdi, can you please let folks know what you guys are doing, what you got coming up, and where folks can find you?
So we have got a lot going on right now. Zeteo.com, Zeteo.com is our place. Come do support us, subscribe us. We've got some amazing documentaries coming out on Gaza and Palestine very soon. We're rolling out some amazing new contributors next week, many of whom viewers of your shows will know. We've already got some great contributors like Naomi Klein and Bassem Youssef and Owen Jones already in our stable, but we're adding to that for the Trump era. And we have a wonderful podcast that just won an award. We're not kidding. So we're doing a lot. So we appreciate your support and we appreciate the plug.
Appreciate the work that you do, brother. It's an honor to be in the struggle with you, and I'll see you on the other side, man. Thank you for joining us.
Bye, Mehdi.
Bye-bye.
All right, Francesca Fiorentini, I'm dying to hear your thoughts on the Trump effect over the last 8 years and like how this is kind of all coming to a head in his inauguration next week with potentially a lot of foreign diplomats and even heads of state showing up from the global populist right.
Yeah, I mean, it's chilling, and it also, I think, to Sarah Nelson's point, and I'm really glad you brought that up, I think we need to have fighters on every single flank here. I don't know war terminology, but like on every single battlefield. So there have to be people who are pushing against the barrage of misinformation that's going to be coming from Donald Trump. There have to be people fact checking. There have to be people pushing back on these narratives. There have to be people who are watching what he does and what his administration is doing. That's going to be critical. But for so much of our sanity, we need to be building. We have got to build, and that can even be with your neighbors. It can be with your, your community members in your schools, in your churches, in your synagogues, in your whatever it is. Like, we have to create spaces of real, again, mutual aid and solidarity. It's the only way we're going to sort of mentally survive, but also physically, quite literally, as we're talking about LA fires and people surviving thanks to the goodwill of their neighbors and their communities. We need to make sure that locally, right, that locally we're electing the right kinds of folks, that we are holding people to account, that we're pressuring Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom, but from the left, that we have, again, these amazing new progressive leftist, city council members that can be the next generation that so many Democrats have fought so hard, whether it's the squad, in nationally or on a local level, to make sure that progressives stay out of politics. So I super agree with Sarah that, like, I hate the reactive doom loop that we can get into. One thing, and I don't want to knock it, but like one thing that people on the left do often is look at like right-wing news outlets and right-wing, influencers and sort of make fun of them. And I do think it's important, but sometimes I think about like the world upside down. Like, imagine if, right now there were right-wingers who watched everything we said, and then they made clips and videos based on the outlandish things we said, like we need a Green New Deal. And I'm like, that's power. I'm tired of giving right-wing mouthpieces more power by highlighting their bullshit. I'm like, what are we building? What are the scary things we're saying, right? What are the real socialist plans that we are creating and enacting? Like, I'm, you know what? I'm absolutely for defund the police. Fuck yeah, let's talk about it. Let's enact it. The right says we did. No, we didn't. So like, these are the kinds of things that I'm interested in building, and on my show, The Bitchuation Room, having activists, organizers, thinkers who can build that. Now to Trump's global fascism, I gotta say, I don't want to give Trump too much credit, because you look at someone like Nayib Bukele and you're like, this dude is his own little creation. Like, Nayib Bukele of El Salvador, who has basically consolidated power, political power in his country, he was able to break through the two-party system it was mostly a two-party system, by just demagoguing them, saying, turning on them, and using his own independence, I think, as a weapon and as sort of like a badge of honor, which a lot of people are responding to, right? And has now enacted sort of this scorched earth, incarcerate first policy on the communities of El Salvador. And depending on who you ask, many El Salvadorans are very on board for it and very okay with it, because they think it's cleaned up the streets. Never mind what happens 10 years later. Never mind when people have been incarcerated for decades. There's no job opportunities when they come back. Nothing's improved in the economy in El Salvador, right? So but it is fascinating, because this, little crypto king demagogue is, the Trump Jr. came to his inauguration. So did Matt Gaetz came to the Nayib Bukele inauguration. What the hell? So the U.S. is actually looking at countries like El Salvador, like Israel, the countries where we've propped up their militaries, we've assisted with their genocides, and saying, what can we learn? Because we want to build walls here. We want to lock people up indiscriminately here in the U.S. So I think there is a scary authoritarian symbiosis happening between these figures.
I want to talk about this a little bit more in like the last half hour that we've got. And I'm going to circle back to it in a sec, but I wanted to let you all know watching live that we've got Francesca, Sister Fran, on for the next half hour. Brother Mehdi had to hop off, but we are here to answer your questions or respond to your comments. So I'm going to be throwing some of those up on the screen in a second. So please, if you've got questions for Fran or for me, please throw them up there, and we'll tackle them, as many of them as we can get to in the next half hour. But a note on the Nayib Bukele thing, Francesca, because we've got a real problem on our hands here, right? And again, I appreciate the hell out of you for actually being, like one of those prominent voices who is talking about this regularly and getting people, your audience, to think about the world beyond, like our own individual scope. Like, think about the world outside of the U.S. borders. And in fact, it would tell you a lot about what's happening here as well. But like, we've also reported on what's happening in El Salvador. We had a really powerful video report published by the great Latin American-based journalist Mike Fox from El Salvador on Bukele's.
Such a good podcast. Everyone should listen to it. Tell me the name of it again. Remind people.
So the one that we put out last year was called Under the Shadow, which was an incredible podcast series that I would highly encourage everyone who's listening or watching this, go binge that whole series, and also listen to Mike's previous series, which we produced with him in partnership with NACLA, the North American Congress on Latin America, called Brazil on Fire. Specifically, go find the episode near the end of Brazil on Fire where Mike investigates the rise rise of the evangelical right in Brazil and talks about how this like right-wing evangelical pro-Bolsonaro group is pretty much saying what the evangelical nutjobs here are saying about Trump. So if you want to look at that Trump effect, if you want to hear it in audio form, it's there in Mike's podcast, Brazil on Fire, and a lot more is there in his podcast that we ran last year, Under the Shadow. But also, to circle back to Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, we published a standalone documentary report that Mike did there about Bukele's dragnet arrest first sweeps. And we talked to family members of those who have been disappeared in these sweeps who are, completely innocent. But maybe they got tattoos. Maybe they've been, accused of being affiliated by a gang, or maybe they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this is the real problem that I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, Fran. And you already touched on this, right? There is a parallel here to Trump and the U.S. that we can learn from, because Trump, as we know, didn't come from nowhere, right? I mean, you have to have a long brewing crisis of legitimacy in the existing system, economy, culture to create enough of a desire in people for something as extreme as Trump or Bukele or what have you. And in El Salvador, we can't pretend that that wasn't the case. We can't pretend that working people, poor people were not, just devastated for years by drug cartels, by gang violence.
Yes.
This impacted them every single day. And now the functional difference for your average working person in El Salvador, as we've heard from them, is I can walk on the streets. My kids can go to school. I don't feel as afraid anymore. And Nayib Bukele, the proto-fascist, neo-fascist guy who has accomplished this, is the most popular politician in the world right now. So but like you said, he's still serving the needs of capital while addressing some of the needs of the people through draconian measures. And then he's incredibly popular because of that. What do we do with that? I guess another way of asking that question is what do we do if someone like Trump remains incredibly popular over the next 4 years? How do we intervene in that? What is the left's place here?
I mean, I obviously am no expert on El Salvador, but I do to what I hinted at before, there's only so long you can lock people up. And we all know what happens. And it has happened in the United States. That is where gangs are formed. So the odious MS-13 formed, wasn't it in Los Angeles? Formed in a prison. So when you lock people up, you are contributing and you treat them like criminals, even if they are not criminals, to say nothing of how we should be treating criminals. Let's put that aside. You will create people who are violent, who are gang members, who don't, when they come out of prison and you have not helped them reintegrate into society or have offered any kind of job opportunities, to say nothing of, prohibited them from being employed simply by the fact that they were incarcerated, what do you think's going to happen? So for me, the Bukele model is really interesting because the U.S. is not El Salvador, okay? We are not being terrorized by cartels, no matter what your Facebook aunt says. That is not happening. But what's interesting about the right in the U.S. is that they're able to convince us that, yes, we are being terrorized by migrants and cartels. And it's happening in, Springfield, where they're eating cats and dogs and they're killing innocent young white victims. We're going to pass the Lake and Riley Act, right? And we are convinced that somehow we are El Salvador. And I think any Salvadoran would come here. In fact, they do want to come here precisely because it is safe. So what are you talking about? It is just very funny that the U.S. suffers from this imagined doom and this imagined crime when crime is down. And so, again, back to LA, these moments when you're oh, all I got to do is go out, talk to my neighbors, meet people, see the solidarity, see the camaraderie, and I am suddenly not afraid anymore. I'm not sitting at home just watching local news and getting freaked out. So I think it is our job, while the U.S. is still a relatively safe place, because we could get to the levels of El Salvador. That's what happens when your elites do not invest in their people for decades and decades and decades. But our job is to break through, to humanize, specifically, I think, the people who've been left out of the system, which are unhoused people, the people who are victims of late stage capitalist greed and systems not working for them. It's to hold accountable our democratic officials specifically who are still neoliberal actors and who still take corporate donations. It's to primary them. It's to unseat them. It's to say their way is leading us down the primrose path back to fascism. They don't pull a Biden. Newsom, don't pull a fucking Biden. Bass, don't pull a Biden. Don't deliver us into the hands of Rick Caruso. Don't deliver us in the hands of a Republican governor so you can seek higher office. So these are all the sites that we need to fight on, because it's not just the global demagoguery. It's happening in every single place where you have very feckless politicians who might be smart. Newsom's a smart guy. He knows what he's talking about. But he also knows that he's never going to pass Medicare for all for California, that he's going to skirt environmental regulations so that rich people can rebuild their homes in places they probably shouldn't build. Like, there's just, so we've got time on some of these areas.
Well, and like the crazy thing that we've got here, to make your point that, like, yes, the United States is not El Salvador. Like, we are not, working people are not being terrorized by, drug cartels, ravaging the streets. But the thing is like, working people are being killed and terrorized by cartels. They're just the ones in boardrooms. They're the ones in D.C. They're the ones who are stocking up the Trump administration right now. They're the people that everyone was righteously pissed off at, like after the United Healthcare CEO was assassinated, right? I mean, like, the cartels are here. They're running the show, right? And we are all feeling it in one way or another. They are poisoning our water and buying off politicians to do nothing about it. They are corporate capturing the regulatory agencies that are supposed to protect us, which is why we now all have PFAS and other forever chemicals like microplastics all in our bodies, which is like, it's so, like, but to your point, at the same time, the right-wing fear machine is constantly trying to convince working people that the dangers are here at eye level. The dangers are around the corner. They're living in your neighborhood. They're in your children's schools. They are your fellow workers who are, responsible for your misery, not the people.
And I think that is so, and this is what if there's like, if how like we each have like the one thing we've said a million times over, if there's one thing that I want people to know of, like, if my political pecking order, the first thing I want to say is that identity politics are radical. They were developed. Identity politics was spearheaded by Black feminists who wanted intersectionality, who said we can tackle capitalism, we can tackle racism, and we can tackle sexism. We can do it all together. That's identity politics. The problem is Democrats have used hollow, empty identity politics only in the form of representation as a stand-in for the real radical identity politics of having not just, again, the Cornell Westline, black faces in high places, but actually passing legislation that positively affects Black communities and poor communities and women. I mean, the one place that we are like El Salvador in the United States in the year 2025, I visited there and I did a whole piece about how they're locking women up for having miscarriages because abortion is criminalized because the rights of the fetus are enshrined in the Constitution. Max, I'm telling you, we are headed there in this country. They will enshrine the rights of the fetus, the rights of the unborn into the U.S. Constitution. And guess what? Then all people with uteruses become second-class citizens, period. And it is fucking terrifying. And we could be sentenced to 30 years to life. I spoke to women who were in prison longer than their rapists who got them pregnant in the first place. That's what they were accused of, is miscarrying / abortion. So it is, I mean, but all to say, I forgot what I was saying before that, but you know what I mean? It's,
Yeah, I mean, like you're spitting fire, and I kind of wanted to build on the emotion here because I'm feeling what you're feeling. I know our audience is feeling it, and we're all feeling a lot of shit right now. And like I kind of want to dig into that real quick. And again, I'm looking at questions in the live chat and comments. We're going to be throwing them up, but on that last point, like, I want to ask if we could like maybe just kind of like, you know, break the fourth wall here and like. I have a question for you, Fran, which is like right now, what do you think your most like unproductive fear is and what your most productive anger or where your most productive anger is coming from? Like, I mean, I guess like for us to be a little sort of internally mindful of where our emotions are coming from and where they're driving us. Like, I'm not telling people out there, don't feel anything, like, but don't be overwhelmed by those feelings, but also know how you can harness those feelings and when those feelings are harnessing you for other ends. So like, yeah, I guess just sort of an open question, like right now, like what's the most immobilizing, unproductive fear that you're feeling right now? And what's something that's galvanizing you?
Most unproductive fear is America's cooked. We need to go. Bye. How do I get out of here? How should I take my child and leave somewhere where the air is cleaner and there aren't guns in people's hands, and somewhere that respects her bodily autonomy and her rights? That's where my maybe unproductive fear is at. And my productive fear is when I squarely plant myself in my place and I say, you know, you live in a neighborhood, a community, a city, you have an elected official, you can talk to them, you can go, you can get involved. There are groups that have been working in the cities that we all live in and the towns we all live in for generations. Plant yourself in this moment in history and get to work.
I think that's beautifully put. I don't want to add anything on to that. I think that was amazing. Like, yeah. Well, let's bring in some comments here from the live chat because you know, like a lot of these aren't even questions, just folks like really, like expressing a lot of things in the live chat that I want to make sure we name here. But we've got. One comment here from Kevin Toohey. I do know the severity, 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Like, again, like, if you need a bigger, example of why the kind of like red state, blue state, MAGA Democrat thing is just horseshit, like, neither of them have a 78% hold on the population. That's working people, blue, red, independent, who are getting screwed over by this economic system. Like, I think that's very rightly pointed out. And let's see.
I think that's the resurgence in labor organizing too, is like, we have enemies. We've got a villains list. Your boss is part of it. Your landlord is part of it. That is how, you've got Elon Musk's in your life. They are your boss. They are your landlord.
Yeah. And they run things like bosses. In fact, if you want to learn about and you want a good sense of what we're in store for in the next 4 years, and in fact, how what we've been moving towards over the last 40 years, like, look at labor struggles. Look at how bosses respond to workers when they get uppity and try to exercise their rights. Like, they get squashed, they get fired, they have their rights violated, they get intimidated, they're subjected to unsafe working conditions regularly, yada, yada, yada. Like, this is the kind of boss governance that, like, Trump and his cabinet, Musk, that is how they think. Like, they don't think about us as human beings. We are at best human-shaped widgets, that can do things for them. But our lives do not matter to them.
No.
Well, and on that, let's throw a few more comments here. So, I think this is, timeless but well put by Black Rain. You can tell the greatness of a nation by how they treat the less fortunate. Yep. And on that note, it's important to underline, as Fran and Mehdi and I have been in this live stream, right, that we need to not just think about the United States as the center of the universe here. And in fact, there's going to be a real interesting dynamic going on between the NAFTA countries, Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. And right now, you've got Mexico's new president, Gloria Sheinbaum, kind of like saying explicitly on the Zocalo in Mexico City that like we have to prioritize the poor for the good of all. Like that's kind of to the point of the comment that we just read. Like, and Fran, I'm curious, like kind of how you're looking at the soul of that statement, and also like kind of how Mexico and Sheinbaum's government are gonna kind of be a player in the next 4 years.
I mean, again, I wish I could only do Latin American politics because I like it way better than American politics. I am no expert, but I have been really heartened by Scheinbaum's rise to power, her posturing, her being able to sort of stand up to Trump, but also say we're willing to work with you. And then, of course, in the LA fires, most recently, sending 75 firefighters and other national forestry and disaster relief workers and officials to Los Angeles and saying, we believe in solidarity. We are a nation of generosity and solidarity. Max, Trump, the Mexicans are rapists and criminals, is about to assume office on Monday, and the president of Mexico wants to be in solidarity with us? I mean, it is crushingly, it's just, I don't even know, I don't have words for that kind of treatment when we have treated them so opposite. And so, I think that there's a model there. I don't think it's an accident she's a woman, but again, hey, look at me playing the identity politics card. But I think it shows you that her administration and AMLO enjoyed a certain amount of support already from the people. What they had done and delivered for the Mexican people clearly bore out. And so that she can get away with saying, when we help the poor, we help everyone. Like, imagine if what would happen in this country, all the Jesus lovers would be like, ew, gross, poor. I don't believe in poverty. No. I'm in the prosperity gospel. God delivers to those who are rich, more riches. So, and I think we had the beginnings and the fits and starts of that in Bernie Sanders. But, I don't know about you, Max, but I'm still in the post-election haze where I haven't fully decided to support the Democratic Party. I'm still like, like they have to do a lot to earn my vote and trust. And we have to do a lot to change them. So if you don't let us change you and transform you, then get out of the way, then we're going to have a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, that's where I am. And I mean, like, like you, and like so many others, that we've spoken to on this channel. I mean, I think like, I'm not naive. I'm like, I grew up a deep red Republican, like in Southern California, in Orange County. Like I spent the first half of my life, a Latino Orange County, like very outspoken Republican. Yeah. And now I'm a lefty socialist nut job, years later. Like that was a long ideological journey that really kind of began or like really turned in the financial crash and Great Recession in the 2008, 9, 10, 11, that range. Those were the years that really changed my life, changed my family's life. Those are the years where the system that I thought I could like work hard in and be rewarded for, like showed how nakedly the deck was stacked in favor of the fuckers who got bailed out for, causing a crisis that led to millions of families like mine losing everything, including the home that I grew up in. Yep. I was working in, warehouses and factories 12 years ago, not knowing what the hell I was going to be doing with my life. But like that period, I think like was really important in sort of like breaking a lot of that ideological crust that I had. Maybe it was the sort of optimism of youth. Maybe it was also still the last dregs of the post-Cold War era where it felt for many of us like, the U.S. was going to, have a big enough pie for all of us to get a piece.
Sure,
and make
that if
a good
you just
life
work
for
hard
ourselves.
enough, you can get that piece. And now, I mean, it's amazing. People now, I think there isn't even that if you work hard. I think everyone left, right, doesn't matter where you stand. You understand that working hard is not going to deliver. Now it's about how do I get the cheat code for this life so I can like at least not even be rich, but just be comfortable? You need a cheat code to like even own a house, right? I need a cheat code, and often that cheat code is a shortcut by bashing minorities and immigrants and women and whomever else who I think has a little bit of something that I want, and so it's just when I really empathize with like people who believe in crypto, and again, I'm not here to knock it. I know a lot of people have it, but it's like, I understand the impetus to like, well, look, if I just play this lottery a little bit, maybe I can get out of the dregs of where the majority of people in this country are at. And in that sense, the right-wing narrative of you too can be a billionaire tomorrow. I mean, they're really just peddling one massive Ponzi scheme, except there are bodies that are being claimed in the process.
Yeah, that hit like an ice pick to the chest, and I want to kind of like, I know we only have a couple more minutes here, but I want to circle back to something you said, right? When we were talking about the productive and unproductive fears we're dealing with now. And I think this also hooks into some of the comments and questions I'm seeing here in the live chat. So I want to put up two here in succession. Like, one, I think a really pointed question from the Brindle Boxer. It's beyond depressing. How do we get out of the doom loop, considering what we're facing in 4 days? And the Brindle Boxer just want to let you know, like, we are with you. We're all feeling that. And I want us to end on that question while also kind of highlighting this other comment from Black Rain again about the need to intervene on the local level. Right. And do what we can to hold politicians accountable, not just react to Trump, but all those people throughout the political hierarchy with names and faces and positions and emails and phone numbers. Right. There's actually a lot that you can do when you see the spread of power instead of just believing that it all resides in one person over here in Washington, D.C. Yeah. And so I kind of wanted to end on that note, Francesca, and give you the final word here, right? We don't have to give everyone a playbook of everything they can do. As we say here at The Real News all the time, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something, right? And more often than not, that something is going to be in your area, in the circles you have influence in your community, in your apartment building, in your workplace, in your district. So I wanted to just ask, for your final thoughts on that, Fran, not just how people can get more involved locally, but what doing something in your real physical world offline, why that is so crucial to fighting the larger forces that we are going up against right now.
I mean, it's every time there's a demonstration, every time there's a protest, every time you go out and you make your sign and you listen to a speech and your legs are hurting and you can't hear the speech and whatever. Like, I really feel that every time I do that, every time I'm with community, I feel much better. I feel mentally prepared and physically and mentally not alone. So I do think protest has a place in the world. We know it has. Power concedes nothing without a demand, never has, never will. But it's also for our own nourishment. I feel nourished when I am in community, whether it's chanting, whatever, a slogan or a song. But I also feel nourished. I feel like I have a couple moments of maybe happiest moments in Francesca's last 10 years, and some of the, other than my child being born, obviously. Two moments stick out. One, fundraiser for the Ayotzinapa 43 disappeared students, students in Mexico, who disappeared in 2015, I believe. And I was at a fundraiser back then in San Francisco, and it was, obviously, this is a terrible thing that happened. It should be incredibly depressing. But there was the food, the music, the number of people that came out, activists and organizers and community leaders that hadn't seen each other in so long, but this awful event brought us together, and we were dancing and we were raising money and we were just in it, and it was It's truly one of the nicest nights I've experienced. Another day in this last year comes to mind when a pro-Palestinian market took place, sprung up in LA. I don't know the organizer's name, and I apologize, but there was everyone selling keffiyehs and pins and cute hats, to doing henna tattoos, to selling, their delicious food from all over the world. Amazing affordable plates, and then you had the poetry and the music, and you're just like, this is it. Like, I feel so fucking seen. I feel so fucking support. We're not here all chanting Rob. We're not getting mad. We're not having a meeting. We're eating good food. We're listening to beautiful music. We are making art. And I know this sounds corny, but I'm telling you, it was intergenerational. I brought my daughter. Don't sleep on building community and having fun. Allow yourself to be joyous even as we resist.
I think those beautiful and powerful words by the great Francesca Fiorentini. If y'all are watching and you are not subscribed to Francesca's show, The Bitchuation Room, you really need to go correct that ASAP. Francesca, I cannot thank you enough for spending this hour and a half with us. I can't thank the great Mehdi Hasan enough for joining us for that first hour. Again, if you're not subscribing to Zateo and following the great work Mehdi's doing, and all the folks at Zateo, including contributors like Francesca herself, who has a great piece out on the LA fires and the people helping in the midst of tragedy. Go watch that video. Subscribe to Zateo. Follow Francesca. Fran, what are you going to be up to? Where can folks find you? Just final plug here before we close out.
Look, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays live, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, youtube.com/Franny Fio, FRANIFIO. My name is too long to write it all out. And you can listen as a podcast, The Bitchuation Room. We try to have comedians and then activists and experts and thinkers and all that. And we try to be fun and be a little irreverent. Go see live comedy, guys. I'll be at the Ice House in Pasadena next Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. Tickets are still available. It's going to be a great show. I'm calling it New World Disorder, a night of political comedy. So come out to that if you're in the Pasadena or LA area.
Hell yeah. So everyone out back home, go check that out. Follow Francesca's work. Fran, I can't wait to have you back on the channel, sis. I really appreciate you taking the time now.
Thank you, Max, as always, for the pointed questions and just your passion. We love it. We see it.
Thank you, sis. Right back at you means the world to me. And to all of you watching, I don't know what's going to happen next week, next year, or in the next 4 to 8 to 50 years. In fact, none of us do, because that story has yet to be written. I want to kind of close on this thought here, because we cannot give over the power of writing history before it's even been written, right? You can't ask what the next 4 years will bring with the assumption that we are just going to be waiting and responding to whatever is passed down from on high. History is always written in that dialectical space between top and bottom, from the grassroots, from the upper echelons, the struggle over power. We are part of that struggle. What happens next depends on what we all do now, how we respond to it, the demands that we put on power, not just the ways that we respond to the whims of power, right? I mean, so think about that. Think about the power that you have, that your community has, the power you can build with your community, with your coworkers, in your workplaces and beyond. Like, you are not powerless here. We are not powerless here, but we will be way less powerful if we already concede the point that, like, what happens in the next few years is just out of our hands. It's not, right? And that is what we here at The Real News are committed to: people power and people in general. We are about you and your communities. We are about people around this country and around the world, and we believe all human life is sacred and worth fighting for, and that we all deserve a world better than this, and that we are the ones who are going to make that world happen. And we at The Real News are going to be there covering your struggle as you make it happen. We're going to be there on the ground. We want to talk to you about what you're going through and how others can help. So please support our work, subscribe to this channel, reach out to us and let us know about your stories so that we can help lift them up and help them reach more people. And above all else, please take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Solidarity forever. Thank you so much for watching The Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work. So please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to The Real News Network. Solidarity forever.